All right, this is order management in Oasis. What preempted or started the conversation here to have this series of webinars really centered around what happens after the order is created, the orders, the invoicing side, the shipping side, and reports and details there. And that's what started this series. Last time there was a lot of people. This one is just resale, so fewer folks. Hope to touch on a few other details here, just specific to resale, to help everyone invoice and deal with those types of orders. Kind of walking through here for a little bit, and this is what I should have been looking at when I was talking there. But we've already done the commissioned orders, so that's done. Resell is today, and we'll go over various details. It's good for distribution. It's good for reps. Basically, anybody buying and selling using Oasis. Shipping will be next month. That's the 6th of June. And then basically, I'm going to collect up a number of different things that are kind of neat as far as, again, order management. And that'll be in July. All right, in-person training in Little Rock. So a little bit of an advertisement here. Actually, we're trying to find interest on here. But if you think it might be interesting, go to Little Rock for an in-person 2-day training. We're looking to do that maybe next year. It'll be some one-on-one workshops, or actually a little more than one-on-one. It'll be whoever shows plus our trainers. We'll bring that down. It'll be this style, but more interactive. That's what we're trying to get towards this. What's presenting this, or the reason that we're asking the question on whether anybody would be interested in doing this. First of all, it's going to cost us a lot of money to make it happen. But the bigger thing on that is we did get a fair amount of traction pre-pandemic at Life Fair with people wanting to do sessions like this. So if you're interested, if it's something you might want to commit to, just send a note to support@oasissalessoftware.com. Trinity, who's actually running all this, she's actually the host on this as well, so she'll be monitoring the chat as well. So let us know, and if we get enough interest in it, we'll make it happen. Major process is, we've already went through the commission items last time, so basic order process, specification orders, and EDI orders. So we've dealt with all those. Today is going to be basic order process as far as the processing the order. I'll create one and kind of show a few details there in a few scenarios. And then how do we deal with invoicing it? Also, for the reps mostly, how can you add commission and track overage on there as well? Most people do overage, but in some cases on the rep side, there could be commission on the resale order that you need to manage as well. Okay, and then shipping's next time. Okay, common order processes. We'll talk through a number of these as we go through. Sales account credits, that's probably more for the last one. Commission accounts, again, more for the last one. The aging reports, I went through some of that with the commission reports, and I'm going to have a larger conversation on that at the end with some of the agings.
Hey, Brian, you're muted.
Oh, I was muted the entire time?
Not the entire time, just at the beginning of this PowerPoint slide.
This slide. I'm not sure how that happened. Okay. And all right, so we'll walk through, basically, here's my agenda. So I'll just move on from there. I'm not sure how I got muted there. Okay. Yell at me again if that happens, Trinity. Okay, let's create a simple order, just a resale order. I won't start with a project, but just keep it real simple. And then we'll walk through different ways to invoice it and a few scenarios that I see with resale orders out there. And if you have any questions, just pop those on the in the chat there, or yell at Trinity. Either way, we're good. All right, in orders, let's create a resale order. So if you look for the little R in the middle of the orders item there, or new resale order, it's all the same thing. Now, one thing I am skipping today, or I'll touch on actually, I will touch on pieces of this. There is some setup required to do a resale order in Oasis. I'll point at them mostly. We won't go through the full details here, but I'll start with a simple order and identify some items that are required. So if you have not ever created a resale order in Oasis, the setup elements you'll have to identify are as follows. And let me go and just close out here real fast. The order. First thing you have to have is a resale company. There's a default one in there already in the Oasis startup. It's BSID or buy sell company. Pretty easy to set up. The main thing here is change this to the name of the resale entity, basically who you're buying and selling as, because this will be the name that appears on the vendor orders. So it's bought from not the customer, but again, your company's buying it. So this needs to reflect that company that you've either set up or the company you're working for directly. Okay. The rest of this, we can help you with, and I don't want to dig too deep into this, but if you have any questions on setting this up, that is definitely a conversation to have with the support. If I had a couple hours, I'd go through all the details here. But main thing is the resale company is essentially what's buying from the vendor and also who's going to bill the customer. And it's not necessarily the same company that you have. In the case of a resale or an agency, the agency may be buying, doing commissioned orders, but may have another entity, a business entity that's doing buying and selling. Okay. All right. In addition to that, for the customers to do resale in the rep version, you have to identify that they are for resale. In other words, you're allowed to do resale for them. And that would be under terms and resale. Okay, you check that, and then their tax status. So, and again, if you're a rep, you might be selling or doing a little bit of resale for distribution. If you're a distributor, don't worry about it. That's all set up for you. It assumes you're going to be doing reselling. Okay. And last major item on this is, and I will touch on this a little bit today, but if you have, let me see, if you're from Canada, there's probably a good chance you're doing some importing, and we can handle that as well. I'm going to touch on that briefly. I hope we have a few of our Canadian users out there, because this will help them the most. If not, we'll report it and show it to them. But the main thing there is, again, there's a little bit of setup. We want to know which currency they're having. Again, I'm acting like Canadian, buying from the US on this one, but then what the landing factor is. And again, I'll touch on this briefly at the end and kind of show you how it works. That way we can get through all the details that's common to everybody, and then do the importing part of it. Okay, so that's a high level of the setup. Main thing is the resale company, customer setup, again, mostly for the reps, but there's a few details that distribution might be interested in on there, but it's mostly set up for them. And then manufacturers, we want to identify, I forgot one detail. In the case of the distributor version, I was thinking distributor, you don't have to worry about whether it's resale okay. We assume you're buying and selling from vendors. But in the case of the rep version, you do have to identify whether it's resale okay or resale only. Basically, if it's resale okay, you can choose whether you're going to run that transaction as being a commissioned order or a resale order. But once you click resale only, that's it. The system will assume that you're always going to buy the product and sell it to someone else. All right, that's the setup. Let's change direction a little bit. I'll go to orders again and finish out that order. I will create a simple little order here. File, new, resale order. Okay, released. And I already have a lot of this set up. So my customer, I use a generic customer here just to kind of get things going. I'll use today's date just for my PO in here. Third one for today. Everything else works the same. Again, towards the end of this series, I'll get deeper into sales accounts, but it wants to know who's getting credit for the sales account. I'll do this one manually this time. 100%. And the rest of the details here are just the same as a commissioned order. Okay, or if you're a distributor, this is your order. All right, items real quick. I'll put in 10, and I'm just going to do a simple little full resale. Get this here. Full resale order. So this is a brand that I only can buy and sell. I did leave the commission column here because I want to show all the possible columns you may have to deal with if you're doing all these options. So I have it set up like I usually hint at for Canadian reps because they have to deal with all this. But most, well, if you're in distribution, cost and sell with profit in the middle is usually all I use. Okay, but the rest of these I'll talk through as we get a little deeper into it. For this order though, I'll just type in some item, doesn't matter what the catalog number is, and your focus is cost. Now, I know I have net up there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and it'll make more sense a little later. But I'm buying it for $100. I'm selling it for 200. That gives me my profit at 100. And all the math should work out. That's your simple order there. And this is the way I want you to think of it. Cost, sell, done. Okay. And at that point, we're going to send the order out, print. And buy from vendor here. I'll send I'll just print it to PDF for the moment. And at this point, I have a purchase order. Notice it does not have the $200 that I'm selling at. It only has the $100 that I'm buying it for. The whole goal here is the vendor doesn't really need to know anything about what you're doing with the material. In other words, they don't need to know who you're selling it to, what the terms of that sale is that you're committing to for whoever your customer is. The only thing they get is the cost and the sell. Notice this says buy sell company. I can't remember the name of the company I have here, but it's not buy sell company on there. This is that resale company that I was hinting at before. All right. Everything else is pretty much the same. I have no idea what they typed in for terms there, but this again, this is a test database. If there are any questions, put those in the chat. Let Trinity know, and she'll stop me on anything that's important here. But that is a basic order. Now, I wanted to show that just to give a level set. In other words, a point of context here as I go through the invoicing of this, and then I'll do a little bit of the same thing when we talk about shipping in a month. The main thing is to understand how this order is put together, because it impacts everything else downstream. It impacts how you apply invoices. It affects how you apply payments from your customers. It also impacts how you pay your salespeople if you're using commission for account or something like that to pay out of Oasis, or at least identify how to pay. Okay.
Hey, Brian, we had a question. What was the source tab that is on the right of the bill of materials? I've never used it / noticed it.
Thank you. Good question. All right, let's go through this and let me pick it apart for just a second. First thing to note is we have the items tab, the general tab, and the addresses tab. Okay, and I'm not sure what's going on there. Let me show for today. What I wanted to hint at here is I create the C right here, this one order, and it created, and I just have to kind of know this because I'm used to the system, but this PO number got generated for me by Oasis. So this is the PO that I send to the factory. This is the customer's PO. And let me open this up for a second. Here is my PO, this customer facing, if you will. Here's my line items. And then here's my vendor order. I just happen to know that that was the one that got generated. Okay. Now, what happens if a customer calls back, let's say several weeks later, and they want 2 more of the same items? Okay. Some of your factories will say, we've shipped it, that order is closed. So I can't add to this existing order. I have to create a new vendor order. Okay. This one says spec 121287. Okay. So that is my PO number. I need to generate a new one to send to the factory. So here's how I do that. I'll go ahead and do a change order here. So again, you can do action, make changes, or just poke the little triangle there. And as soon as I do that, I can add an item, and I'll add in my 2 more items. Same factory, okay, and some item. Still buying, and I'm skipping that for the moment, $200. I'm doing everything the same, but here's the thing. If I leave this alone, Oasis will assume that I can add it to this existing PO. But as I said in my scenario there, the factory shipped it. They're not going to take and add to that existing PO. They've closed it out. They want a new PO number. What I can do is I can tell Oasis, okay, I want a new vendor PO. At that point, it'll generate a new one for me. And I'll do that here in a second. And it'll be in 2 different vendor POs, but all pointing back to the same customer PO. That allows me to build those 2 vendor POs together, manage them together, update order status together. The whole thing's integrated. Okay. So another way of saying this, the source gives me the capability of either keeping the new lines, a given new line on the existing vendor PO, which is the default. I can put it on hold, which is another way of just saying, hey, don't create the vendor PO yet. I can create a new vendor PO, or if you're doing owned inventory. So we have consignment inventory in Oasis. And we also have owned inventory. But if you create a warehouse pick, that'll actually draw out of that inventory. Okay. And again, if there's questions on this, pop those in the chat. I'll cover as much as I can today. I may have to say no on the warehouse right now because that'd be a nice webinar in the future. But I'm going to skip that one for today. But that would pull out of that warehouse. There's also consolidation POs. I'll hint at those, and if there's enough interest, I might just have a importing webinar exclusively on that later. But the whole concept on a consolidation PO is I can have 2 or more customer POs that combine together and create one vendor PO. And what I have happened here, I have had happen here with a number of, again, usually Canadian reps on this one, is they'll go through and they'll have 3 or 4 different customer orders and they'll put them on a single consolidation PO. That allows them to do things like buy a container somewhere, maybe in the EU or somewhere else, load that container with fixtures, ship it, and then sell the container obviously once it comes in. But then they can take and break that that material that come in back into the 3 different customer orders that they had, and the consolidation PO just keeps track of all that. So again, that's something I don't want to cover today. If that's of interest, then we can put a webinar together on the rest of a reset or importing in Oasis. There's some neat features there. Okay, so for right now, in my example, I'll just do a new vendor PO. We will print it. And notice it's generated me a brand new vendor PO for me. And as soon as I print it, again, I'll go to PDF here. Yeah, that's the right screen. Did the same thing. I have 2 items now. Still a unit cost of $100, extending out to $200. Again, I'm selling it for $200, extending out to $400 on that, but that's not what the vendor needs to know. That's for my billing here in a second. And that's what my PO looks like. My second PO to that same factory. Okay. Hopefully I answered your question on that one. If I did not, please tell Trinity and I will dig a little deeper. Okay. Do an update today. All right, so I have a number of POs that I created before. I wanted to go through and do various scenarios that I see people do with vendor PO or resale orders in here. First thing I like to hint at, because it seems like everyone kind of misses this one, and it's a good example here. Notice how my screen, if I resize something and I click on it, it pops back. This is pretty true to Oasis. Just go in here, and once you get the width of this, the way you like it the most, go to File Preferences and hit OK. That will keep that width the same from now on that screen. And it only affects you. You don't have to worry about affecting the other people in the office. So little plug for something I see a lot of folks kind of fight over the years. Okay. All right. Now, again, Trinity, if you need to stop me, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to build one of these. Sorry,
Yep, we have another question. Does the source tab work in the same way on non-resale orders?
So on non-resale orders or commission orders, it works very similarly, but the number of choices is less. One of the primary reasons for the source column in a commissioned order is it allows you to pull out of a consignment inventory. So if a factory, if you don't do consignment, sometimes factories, they'll provide you with some material that you keep in a warehouse, basically store it for them in that city. And then you can, as you sell it, you might get a little extra percentage or something like that from them, but you still have to tell the factory, hey, we just shipped this out of our inventory. And then they bill the customer normally. So consignment. Okay. And again, stop me if I need to go through another one of these training. Okay. First way you can bill someone, and I like to do this a number of different ways. And tell you what, I'm going to do this a couple of different ways on this. The first way is what I see most people actually do. Okay. So a lot of individuals will come in here and see this one PO that they have in the system, their first one, and they need to bill the customer. That's really the main thing that you're looking for. You can do that a couple of ways, and I'm going to show you the kind of the one that gets most people by, at least if you're starting out in resale. And that is, I have my PO. I simply want to create an invoice and send it to the customer. So you can start by being in the PO and go to File, New, Customer Invoice. Okay. So a customer invoice is basically an invoice that's going to go direct to the customer and say, hey, please pay us whatever it is. and tracks as you'd expect. The vendor invoice would be on the vendor side. So it tracks the invoice inbound from the vendor to you. And I'll go through the scenarios where you would want to do that. And then a resell invoice, we come up with this name, it really combines the two. And what's happening on this resell invoice that I'll talk about is it allows you to track the inbound invoice from the factory and at the same time generate an outbound invoice to the customer. Okay. So again, I'm going to start with the easiest one. This is a customer invoice like from the PO. And it's just a full-on invoice. By the way, we also have credits in Oasis. If you don't like credits, you can use negative invoices. The only reason for using a credit is it can be used to segregate the on reports, the credit versus an invoice. It kind of helps that process. But outside that, they're pretty much the same. All right, invoice. So at this point, we have our first customer invoice, and there's several things going on here I wanted to talk through, okay? I did forget earlier to call out one setup item I do want you to go back and think about, and that is taxes, okay? So in most cases, I wouldn't say most cases, but in a lot of cases when I'm talking with users, they are selling basically to distribution or trying to basically the rep selling to distribution or just trying to do various things where they're trading money for various reasons. I'm biting my tongue here because I don't want to get in the weeds there. Long story short is you don't have to worry about taxes because the distributor deals with that. But anytime you're selling to an end user or basically not distribution, or if you're a distributor selling to contractor or something like that, again, you have to deal with taxes, and there's several options you have there. Inside of Oasis, your options are to use what we call tax accounts. And the way this works is in tax accounts, you're going to have one of two options. And my recommendation is use what we call tax accounts too. I don't want to get super deep in the weeds here, but the main thing we do in tax accounts too is we identify the taxing authority. So in this case, we have Arkansas. That's where I'm at. We have a percentage here. I want to get into priorities and all this other stuff because it's a longer conversation again. But the key here is I know the state or province, I know a set of limits. So I know basically a product type. And again, some things are taxed, some things are not. Labor may be taxed differently than materials. Different cities, I usually don't use that, but zip codes come into play, especially for some of the large areas. But the key thing is this all deals with the product and the ship to location. Once those two are locked in, then the system can identify the taxes and calculate those for you. This has to be updated manually if you choose to use this through Oasis. Okay, so that is one of your options to set up taxes and the tax accounts in Oasis and let the system calculate it for you. The other thing that I'll hint at here in a second, I'll actually show the, sorry, let me go, there it is. Try not to use two screens showing all this stuff. Let me just make this a little smaller. So all this appeared down at the bottom simply because tax accounts were active. It identified by the ship to address. So again, my address is here that I identified. It's Cabot, Arkansas, so it triggered it right there. And that basically filled in all these details. Okay, so that is a setup item you have to deal with. Cabot also triggered as well. I could go open that account. That's kind of the same thing. Okay, if you choose not to do this, we do have another thing for the QuickBooks users. You can export basically the customer invoice to QuickBooks and let QuickBooks deal with all the tax accounts too. So that is another option for QuickBooks users. And we have some other things that we're working on that should help as well, but more on that later. Okay, so that's taxes that I want to identify because that's a good chunk of what a lot of people probably zoned in on right there. It's like, it's not just the one item, it's taxes. Okay. All right, so the way you look at an invoice in Oasis, again, this is a little bit of a repeat from last time, but you have a gray line here that is the item exactly as it appears on the order. This is essentially the line on the order. The yellow part is the invoice itself, okay? The main thing is you want to identify how many you want to invoice this time. I'll put in 10, it's fully invoiced, and what you'll see is the order amount and the estimated earnings is going to copy over to this invoice. That's the way you look at it. And then this is the sum of all invoices. Okay, if I go half, should see basically half the order and half the earnings there. Okay, Now, there is, if you do not have it already on your screen and you're doing billing, I strongly recommend that you go to File and Preferences, and there is a column called QI, that's Quick Invoice. What I like about that is if I now need to invoice just one of 10 fixture types, I can just find it, click the little box, and all it does is it takes the released amount that hasn't been billed and copies it in the quantity field. Okay, now notice what I said there. It takes the released amount that has not been billed and copies it in the quantity field. That's important because if you had that 5 before, it would know to only bill 5 more this next time. Okay. There are also tools up here that are real nice. So invoice all simply identifies, again, everything that is remained to be billed and copies that into the quantity column. Okay. Okay. And if there's any questions on this, again, support can help you on that, or this video is available. Ask us for training and dig into more details there. But that's pretty much all there is to it. We just wanted to identify the quantity and we bill it out. So Resell tends to be a little bit easier on this, but you also have the ability to do some splits in here. And I'll refer you back to the previous webinar because we did cover that a little bit. But you can actually go through and split this this item using what was called a factory line on there. But I'd rather do that on the order, and I'm going to skip that for today unless someone is pressed to have me go through it. Okay. All right. So this is our bill. We're done pretty much. We hit print. It will generate an invoice number for us. By the way, it is asking me a question. It just pops up on the screen for various reasons. Hit OK. Let's generate a PDF. And at this point, it has generated a invoice number for me. And this is how I set up my system. You can set the system up, and that is in that resale company to have the prefix and a starting number, and just keeps counting up on that number. Okay. I did have my or do have my system set up where it always defaults resale orders to lot bill. And that's what you're seeing here is regardless of the number of items here, it won't put in a price or an extended price on them. It'll total it out on. That's just the way the system's set up. The form that I have will do a subtotal. Notice I said a form because everyone argues about how the customer invoices should look. It's a preference thing, and we can change this. There's some default forms we can send you, and there's other things we can do to make them look more the way you want. But by default, it's going to do a subtotal, and this is going to run through the taxes or freight. I didn't put any freight on that. I'll show you that here in a second as well. But it took the freight. And or I'm sorry, the 2 taxes, subtotaled those, and then added everything together. Okay, that's it. We have an invoice at this point. Just true to Oasis, a few things have been going on in the background. First of all, in the attachments, it actually has generated the invoices. And if I show all through this tree over here, again, Oasis has this Oasis tree that has the resale order itself, each vendor order. And then as I invoice things, it'll show invoices underneath the vendor invoice. It'll show the vendor invoices underneath the vendor order, but there isn't one yet. But it does show this one customer invoice there. For reasons I'm not sure of myself at the moment, is put both the vendor order and the vendor invoice, or I'm sorry, the customer order and the customer invoice inside the attachment for the resale order inside this one folder. But we chose to do that a long time ago. It's just kind of the way we stuck with it. And again, if I double click on it, there's my invoice. It gives you the capability, especially if you're emailing from Oasis, it'll put the email in here as well. It gives you the documentation that you need later to identify, hey, did we bill it? Who did we send it to? It's all there for you, and very useful, I think. All right. If you're
Hey,
not
Brian, we have another question.
okay.
In some cases, we do pro forma invoices to bill freight later. What is the best day to notate that freight is to be billed upon shipping?
Okay. Freight is be billed upon shipping. So pro forma is a little different. Let me see. So pro forma, though, that's usually for material. That's where I'm a little confused here. The freight, I'll show you how to do freight here in a second, but you can do what we call a, sorry, I have to look it up myself. You can do a shoot. I'll do that next. Do it on B here. There is what we call a new deposit invoice. So there is typically a difference between pro formas and deposits. Pro formas, we don't really have a simple solution on. Usually that's done for some of our customers back on the quote. In other words, they want a quote before they actually start sending anything out. And that's usually done way up front. So we have a form we can change out, usually the landscape print of the quote, say it's a pro forma, and that allows people to collect money before they engage into a large project. Okay. Now, freight is handled a little bit different. And again, if I don't answer this to your completion on that, pop another note and Trinity will stop me. And I'll go as far as I can down this one because there's a lot of different tentacles to this one. But let me do a deposit invoice because that is the most common one I see. And we will also do freight on top of that. And I've seen freight done a couple of ways where it's put on the order and billed up front, if you will. And I've also seen cases, probably the most common case, where freight isn't known. So once you get charged freight, you then pass that freight on to the customer. Okay. So I'm going to go through those scenarios. And again, stop me if this is out of bounds here. Okay. One other item I want to show is, notice freight is prepaid NAD. That is another element inside of Oasis that will change. Basically, when you get billed freight, the system is going to make a couple of choices based on whether you're saying it's freight allowed or not. If you say it's freight allowed, you're going to start eating the freight by Oasis terms. But if it's prepaid NAD, we're going to pass that along. So, all right. I know I've said a lot right there. Let's do a couple of small things first. First thing, let's do the deposit invoice. Okay. And again, a pro forma, I consider that a little bit different. That's usually before you have the order. All right. So file new, deposit invoice. Just for argument's sake, I'll do and again, let me do that one more time because I tend to do this real quick. And that's why I like doing this stuff on site because usually someone screams at me. I have my order, say file new, deposit invoice. Okay. At this point, I'll start with a 50% deposit. Okay. And what it just did is it said, okay, you need to take half the order. So it calculated it for you. Okay. And by the way, you can collect that payment at the same time. I'll skip that for right now. I want to do all the payments individually, but you could say, hey, I collected $1,000 now, or I'm sorry, this is a check number and this is the amount I collected. So it'd be $1,000 and it would take care of that for you as far as creating all the transaction in Oasis. But I'll stop right now and say print. And let's take a look at what okay, here. And it turns out a deposit invoice looks almost like a regular invoice, but it behaves a little bit differently inside of Oasis. And I'll show you what it looks like in the system here in a second. But the main thing is when it prints, it says deposit invoice. You get an invoice number that's independent of all the other invoices. It does show the bill of material. It shows basically the percent of the deposit and the total due. So it's 50% of the total of the order. Neat little routine, works great. I forgot why we did multiples, but I think with customer copy and font, yeah, duplicate and stuff like that. You can turn that off actually. All right. So now if we go into attachments, you'll see this resell, this invoice icon here. If you double click on it, it is that deposit invoice. Notice there's no bill of material here. It just says deposit. And that's the way deposit invoices look inside of Oasis. Again, not really a pro forma, but it's starting this process for me. Okay, so now let's go ahead and build the balance of this. Okay, so let's assume that they pay this. So $1,000 has been paid. Let's go ahead and create our customer order or a customer invoice again. So again, same thing I did before. I started with a customer PO. I go to File, New, Customer Invoice. Well, I know why, but anyway, save anyway. And invoice. Now, what clicked on the wrong bar. So what's happened here is just the same as before, is it copied over the bill of material. It did the taxing before, but it added a deposit line here because it detected that this invoice was created from an order that had a deposit invoice. Okay, so let's assume everything shipped. So I'll do my tools at the top, invoice all. So it basically copied in everything that was released and had been billed, which is the entire thing. And now I have a $200 per item, so $2,000 invoice. However, you notice that there's $1,000 deposit. By the way, you can stretch this and do the file preferences and remember your widths later. So I'll do that real quick. And what it's showing here is it's reducing the amount of the invoice by $1,000 because it's drawn $1,000 from the deposit that it found, the deposit invoice. So my order was still a $2,000 order. This invoice is showing 2,000 with $1,000 earnings, but then it's applying the deposit on there. And I know it looks kind of different, but it basically is reducing the amount owed. Let's take a look at what that looks like when we print. Yes, ask what they let's do here. There we go. So again, it started out pretty much as it's spelled out, but it looks a little different if you haven't seen one before. It starts out by totaling the invoice just as it did before. So it's $2,000 at the subtotal. We reduce it by $1,000 because we're drawing on the deposit, the full amount. By the way, if we shipped half the order, it would take half the deposit. So it's going to use a prorated amount of that deposit based on the amount that's shipped. Okay. So it isn't going to use $1,000 each time. It's going to take the amount that actually shipped and applied. And the whole goal is if you ship half, it's going to use half the deposit. If you ship the balance or the second half later, it'll use again half the deposit, thereby expiring the amount of the deposit. Okay. You still have to collect taxes on that and end up with the result there plus the deposit. By the way, taxes are added to the invoices on there. There is a way of doing that on the deposits, but that's again another technical. I'll unless someone has issues, I'll chase that at a later date. Okay, let me know if there are questions there. And that is a deposit invoice. Now, let's go in another direction for a second. And again, Trinity, holler at me if I need to do anything else. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change direction a little bit and show you the vendor side, but I'm going to show you more of the way people start using the vendor invoices and using those to trigger outbound or customer invoices. That last PO that we created is a good example or starting point because we have two different POs, two different vendor POs. And that allows me to go through and show you a couple of scenarios here. So let's start with the spec 1287. But what I'd recommend is if you're going to use this, just treat it like any other invoice. And by that, I mean, let's go to the invoice section. And what I'll do is I'll say file new. And by the way we have the system set up, if you're a rep and you're doing a lot of commission orders, you can actually start by using commission invoices. But technically what I'm going through here is a vendor invoice. And sorry, I got to check because my memory isn't very long today. Trying to think ahead and kind of missed a few things here. There we go. I can't remember the numbers today. So realistically, what you should get is an email or there's not too much snail mail going anymore, but you're going to get billed by the vendors, what I'm trying to hint at. So what we're trying to collect here is that vendor invoice. Okay. I'll start by putting in just the number on it. So it's a spec 1287 was the one I was playing with or mentioned earlier. And it's the same thing as before. Is it an invoice or credit? Invoice. Okay. What's their invoice number? I'd have to look on it and find out. I'm going to make one up for today. So maybe it's something like this. Okay. So there's my vendor invoice that I just got from the factory. At this point, it works pretty much the same. I'm just recording this fact that I got billed in the system to trigger a outbound billing. And I'm going to do this because I want to combine these two invoices together and bill my customer one time. I'll show you how that works here. So I start in, let's say it's a complete shipment and everything shipped. I can actually record just like on the commission orders. I can record my shipping information here as well. And if you have a customer service team that's trying to track shipping as well, you might talk to them. The reason why I recommend that is sometimes the customer service team will want you to fill out the shipping information. Sometimes they won't. Again, that's a conversation I think you need to have. But if you do, it will report it. It'll update the order, and that's something you can send off to your customers as far as shipping. More on that next time. Okay, so we have this built in. We're pretty much done. At this point, the main thing we try to identify on a vendor invoice, just like on a commission invoice, is did we get billed what we thought we were going to get billed? Okay, if it is wrong, in other words, if we're getting billed something different, I say they charged $110, put it in there. Of course, I would dispute it and try to find out why we got charged incorrectly. We can talk through that a little bit later if people are seeing this. But the main thing is we want Oasis to match reality. But again, if you have to dispute something, that may force a change if you were in fact incorrect on that value. Of course, if you send them a PO for $100 and they build you 120, there's probably something wrong. Anyway, more on that if you have questions. Anyway, I'll save and close. There's an interesting question that's going to pop up. Change order status and schedule. That's fine because I didn't fill everything out. I'm going to work on it. All right. Create the matching customer invoice. If I want to create it now and say yes, it'll actually help me build this thing out to my customer. But I don't want to do that. I want to actually pick up the invoice for that 1288 order and build both of them together. So I'm going to say no. I'll do the same thing I did before. I'll do a file new. Sorry, I'm on the wrong thing. Invoices, file new, vendor invoice, spec, it's R, sorry, I can't remember. Oh, shoot. I want to close, sorry. No. I never remember its spec. Yeah. Oh, I thought an R spec. Oh, yeah, there we go. So that's my second. And again, you don't have to worry about what I just did there. You just simply go through and apply the vendor invoices that come in. I'm just trying to make up my scenario here. So don't worry about me bouncing back and forth there. So it's just me being goofy. Again, what is their invoice number? I have no idea. It's just whatever they send to me. Let's say that's what they send. And again, as I hinted at last time, if you want to record the invoice dates on the vendor orders, that's okay. Be consistent though. If you never put in the invoice date, in other words, if you leave it today, just keep doing that. If you put in the invoice date from the factory, just keep doing that. More on that in 2 months on why that's important. Yeah. Same thing as before. I'll go through and say invoice all. And on this one, I'm going to do one more thing. So that invoice the whole thing. Let's say I got hit with a freight charge on this one because it's below the freight charges, my minimum for freight. The way you add freight from the vendor side is I'll simply say add item. I'll click on freight. Let's say I got hit $50 on. Okay. So $50 is what I'm recording as freight coming in from the factory. And remember, my order was prepaid and add. So what that should do is it's going to bill the customer hopefully $50 here in a second. See what happens. All right, save and close because everything's billed out. Looks good to me. I have the right order. I have the right invoice number. I have my date correct. Billing for everything in there. So it's both items that ship. I got hit with this freight charge because it's below my minimum, and I hit save and close. Okay, and at this point, I have this little scheduled thing because I left that brown line in there and I didn't get rid of it. I'll just simply say, okay, it doesn't matter. All right. Now, at this point, create matching customer invoice. Yes. Create an invoice or credit. It's an invoice I'm going to send to my customer. Now, check this out. Several things are going on here. First thing is it did exactly as we had before. We have the order line, both of them, and we have the invoice lines, and we have the taxes, and we have the freight line pulled over. There's our $50. We're starting out, we're going to bill the customer the freight. Now, I want to build everything complete. So what I'll do again is I'll do tools, invoice all, boom, it's all the way through. By the way, if you notice up here, there's select invoiceable works a little bit differently. In this scenario, it's going to do basically the same thing, but invoiceable will actually go through and identify your vendor items that have been billed to you and collect them together. So that basically you select invoiceable. If you have like 10 or 15 different fixture types here, 2 of them are shipped, and you will bill those together. And there's a remaining balance that'll ship later. So again, Trinity, if there's questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will print this invoice and we'll take a quick look at it and go to the next step. All right, so I have my 2 items. And if you put shipping in here, by the way, it will actually show it, but I've been ignoring that this time. $2,400 invoice, $50 in freight total. Taxes, by the way, some of these taxes can be set up to bill freight too. I've been skipping some of the tax details, but trying to plant seeds if you crash into some of these issues. Total for the taxes, total due, there you go. Okay. Now, last big one that I want to show, and I think I have a couple of orders for this. So let me take a look here. I think it was. Oh yeah, I did that. Sorry, I gotta remember my okay. So this one, I want to kind of pull a few things together and show you the rest of some details going here. I won't show all of them, but again, when I get an invoice in from the factory, what I'll do is I'll simply do a file new, and I want to show you a resell invoice. So I've been showing you vendor invoices, I've been showing you customer invoices. Let's do a resell invoice now. And this one you have to select, you know, to make it go. So you have to know it's a resell transaction to start with. But let me do a spec 1281, I believe it was. It found it. And notice what's happening here. I have this vendor side and I have this customer side. Okay. And this was that order that I pulled up earlier. It has, I don't know, 3 or 4 different vendors on it, but it pulled up one of the vendors on that order. I still have to put in the invoice from the factory. But as I do this and I start adding items to it, it'll actually identify the amount. So I did 100 items. It cost $44 each. So $4,400 invoice. Okay. 100 items, those same items are basically, I'm selling for $49. So it's a $4,900 invoice going out. Okay. And I'm doing both of them at the same time. It'll also take care of freight and taxes and everything else as I'm moving through. At this point, I'll just identify what shipped. Let's say the first fixture type shipped, and then the second item, whatever it was, as well. That's it. Those are the 2 items. And as I walk through this, it's going to deal with both the commission, or I'm sorry, the vendor side and the customer side both. Okay. Prints just the same. And by the way, you can print the vendor side if you want as well. Since I'm sending this to my customer, I really don't care. I'm just going to send the one, and it will look the same. Total of the invoice, taxes, subtotal, grand total. Okay, Trinity, any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to do, I'll go through a couple of different scenarios for various groups.
None right now.
Okay. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is go back to orders, and I want to show you a couple of things to watch out for. One on the commissioning side, as far as agencies and how they might track commissioned lines that they also can resell. I also want to go through one very quick scenario where I'm going to bill out a imported item. This would be more for any Canadian users out there as well. Mostly, there's been a couple of U.S. Agencies do this as well, but usually the Canadians are having this issue more because of the market. I'll leave it at that. All right, so I'm in orders. I'll do a file new resell order. Okay, and it's a released order. Still have my customer. Okay. Uh-oh. Okay. I will begin by having 10 items and keeping it simple. I have a brand in here that allows me to do buy and sell or commission orders both. So I just catalog number there. Now, the reason why I had net price and cost up here, and if you're doing resale, just straight resale like we've been going through, you're buying it for X, you're selling it for Y. And again, distribution is a good example, or what most reps do. But if you have a commission rate on it, what I'll do is I'll put in $100 here. The $100 is technically off the net price, but typically, unless you're doing importing, net and cost are exactly the same. But for this example, I want to show everybody all the details just to make sure all this makes sense. But the 5% that I need to track on my commission side, in other words, in my backlog, commissioning and everything else, I need to track the $5 that I have off this per item, or $50 total. Okay. Now, as soon as I add in my profit here, so let's say I'm adding $50 to each one of these, I also have margin on this that I need to track on the customer side. And that's exactly what Oasis is doing here. It's going to track just like a regular commissioned order, the 5% on the 100, but it's also going to track, just like we went through today, the resale side of this, the $50 on that we're billing out to the customer on top of what we bought it for. Okay, let's print it and see what it looks like, and then go through I'll kind of stop there on this one. So let's print it and then also do the invoice on it as well. All right, my system's doing something odd here, but let's go ahead and print that. And save. Notice the order looks a little bit different. I didn't make a big deal of it last time, but it said purchase order and it was a landscape print. That's typical for Oasis resell only. You can do some things to flip between the two forms, but by default, if it is a brand that you can buy and sell or do commissioned on, it will show the commissioned order. And we have to do that because we show that we're going to buy it for $1,000. We're still hoping to collect the 5% on it. And again, there's a way of reversing this. I didn't want to go in that today. But if you are tracking that 5%, this is the way you do it. And we have to tell the factory that we expect $50 on that item or those 10 items when it ships. So again, we have to spell this all out to them. Okay. Everything else works just as normal. And just for argument's sake, and because I haven't done this, I'm going to start here and I'll actually go through the process of pulling this in as a, or doing a resale order or resale invoice. There we go. So file new, notice we have the resale invoice like. Again, all these you can start from the order, which is fine, but I usually start from the invoice side if I'm just receiving a vendor invoice. But just for brevity today, I'll show this to you. And it works pretty much the same. The main thing I wanted to identify here is, notice we have estimated earnings on the vendor side. On the customer side, again, we have that $500 of profit. The system is tracking both of those concurrently. So this will appear on your backlog reports as you'd expect. This would also appear on your vendor commissioning reports as well. Okay. And this appears as you'd expect. Okay. Print it, should look pretty much the same. Oh, I need the vendor invoice number. Oop, I hit save and close. I didn't print it. I'll skip the print. We're running short on time because I want one other thing to show. And again, if you want me to print it, let me know. Just let Trinity know, and I'll print that one. Okay, let's go through and I'll create one last order. And like I said, I want to do one thing on importing because we have a lot of Canadian users out there doing exactly this. So I'll do a file, new, resell order, fully released, still a customer order. Again, notice I'm using the same customer, using the same process, the same tools. Items. And I have a vendor set up that I showed earlier, the import vendor here that I do a lot of testing on. And it's basically set up, I think, for 1.2. And it's assuming that I'm a Canadian buying from a US factory. And again, you can set it up however is real out there. But the main thing is I have an item. I'm buying it for $100. Okay. And this one I won't show commission on but I could. A lot of the Canadian reps I work with, they usually work out a deal where they take out the commission and only buy it for the US price less the commission. But if you were tracking that commission, you could put that in here as well. The only thing I want to warn you about is the commission is in the denomination of the factory. And that means the system has to track it as such. So it'd be $100 or it'd be, let's say it's 5% here, it'd be $5 US per item, not Canadian. And that's just something you have to keep in the back of your mind. And we call it out in a few places, but not real well yet. Okay. Notice the cost change. Okay. It isn't that it's different. It's just it ran through the currency change and the landing factory to come up with a new cost. At this point, I put in my profit because the cost will be in Canadian. The net price is in the US in this example. And we end up with a sell price again that's in Canadian. Cost and sell are always in the denomination of the agency. Okay. net price is always in the denomination of the factory. Okay. Again, if I print it, printing sales accounts. And if I print it, by the way, it's copying this down. I didn't go into that big, really deep, but if you see this pop up, there's nothing wrong other than to identify that whatever I changed, in this case, a sales account, that I want to copy down to my vendor orders. Basically, do I want to pay the salesperson any commission on this? Well, there's no commission, so I'm going to just hit OK and not worry about it. All right, PDF file should look the same. And this is $100. The only thing we don't do right now that I keep hoping to get back to is the USD here, because that's really what's going on here on this particular one. So you just kind of have to know it right now. All right, that is a imported order. Everything else works exactly the same. There is no difference here. So if I go through and I do a file, new, resell invoice or any of the others. So basically the cost of the price of the vendor side is going to be in the denomination of the factory or whatever I bought it for, and the customer side is going to be in the denomination of the agency, Canadian in this case. So again, my factory is the same, or the invoice numbers are the same. I'm billing it as, or getting billed for it. So I have to identify that the 10 items are shipped, and I just got a bill from the US in this scenario. And I end up with $1,000. That's it. I pay the $1,000 on that. And what I end up with here on the other side is it actually identifies the total amount, okay, in Canadian. And that's what it's going to bill the customer. Again, I have to deal with taxes. Weird that you'd be billing Canadian taxes or Arkansas taxes in Canada, but again, you probably switch these out and have whatever the province tax is and the various things you have set up, and we can talk through those details if we need to. So trying to skip a lot of the tax questions for today. Here we go. I bill the customer. I get basically the amount that I'm billing there. What's the tax? Oh, no tax, because I've totally gotten this thing confused right now. Again, it's all off of the addresses, and I messed that one up on this one. So I didn't catch that earlier. If you want more details on this, but basically the addresses I happened to use this time didn't line up properly, so I didn't know what to do with them. So more on that if you have questions. All right, we're short on time. I have to collect some money. So what we want to do is go to payments real quick, do a file, file, new, customer payment, not a commission check. Identify my customer. Check number, whatever the check number is, or however you want to track it. So if it's the month, the March payment, then that's okay. Check amount, whatever it is. Okay. Tools, because we're short on time here, I will show all unpaid invoices, and I don't know what's going to, okay, found the ones. And again, normally what I would do is I put in the invoice number, the amount paid, if you get an email from them or something like that, that identifies it. Otherwise, you kind of have to check through and identify that the amount matches whatever, whatever the detail is there. Whatever they paid you. There we go. So main thing here is I checked the first couple of them, and those is basically for those two invoices. Hopefully it's $33,180.10. And at that point, that's the amount that I pulled in. And again, you can dispute, use the same process. I'll refer you back to the previous webinar on that. It works the same. You're trying to do the same thing. You're trying to make your difference here go to 0. I don't think I'm going to make it here. I'll get close. No, I'll just put in the same email there. Okay. I just changed that. It's not the way you normally do it. But the main thing is now I have it recorded in the system, the payment from the customer. As soon as I post this, it'll update all the same reports we'll talk about in a couple of months. So commissions for account, and the paychecks and everything else just got updated as soon as I post and save this. It'll also set the close out the orders and invoices as well. And again, I did a little bit deeper job on that last time in the previous videos. Okay. All right. We have 1 minute left. Do I have any open questions, Trinity?
No open question.
Okay. If you have any questions, do let us know on this. This is another reason why I really like being in person and having what we're trying to do next year, hopefully. It's easier to talk through this stuff because there's usually the little questions, there's little scenarios in there. And if those are going through your mind, or if you have questions on it, please engage support. Again, that's support@oasissalessoftware.com, or give us a call here. It's 501-843-6750. And hope to see you next month at the next webinar, where we'll go over shipping and we'll focus on that. Thank you very much for your time. Talk to y'all later.